On the afternoon of March 23, 2003, Paul Christos thought he was playing a game. His wife had suggested it the day before, something to bring a little excitement back into a marriage that had quietly gone cold. The rules were simple. One of them would be blindfolded and handcuffed, while the other pressed objects against their skin, and the bound person had to guess what each object was. Sheila went first, lying on the floor, handcuffed to a chair, correctly identifying item after item. Then it was Paul's turn. He lay there, blindfolded, handcuffed, completely at her mercy, guessing household objects while his wife moved around the room. Then she told him there was one last item, one more thing to guess. She walked to the kitchen, she came back, she sat on his midsection, pressed the object to his face, and he guessed it was a candle. It was a paring knife. She drove it into his chest twice. When Paul screamed, she told him something had fallen on him. When he begged her to call 911, she picked up her phone and called Nelson Sessler, the man she was having an affair with, to arrange dinner for that evening. And when she finally agreed to drive Paul to Westchester Medical Center, she pulled into a remote parking lot, got out of the car, opened the rear door, and stabbed him a third time while he lay helpless in the back seat. A group of bystanders saw what was happening and ran toward them. Paul managed to grab the knife and throw it into a pile of bricks nearby. Sheila fled. Paul Christos survived. And when investigators started digging into the woman who had just tried to kill her own husband, they found something that made everything worse. 4 months before she stabbed Paul in that parking lot, an age 32-year-old woman named Annalisa Raimundo had been found stabbed to death in Stamford, Connecticut apartment. 9 stab wounds to the face, neck, and chest, a clump of hair in her hand from fighting back, a drop of blood on the bathroom sink from someone who had washed up afterward. And that someone was Sheila Davalloo.
Welcome to Fatal Rejection. Please subscribe before we go any further. Thank you. Before we get into what Sheila did, you need to know who Annalisa Raimundo was. She was born on September 11, 1970, in Brooklyn, New York, to Dr. Renato and Dr. Susan Raimundo, a Filipino-American family that had built something real in this country and raised a daughter who was determined to build something real of her own. Annalisa went to Harvard, then Columbia for her master's degree. She had plans to go further: medical school, a doctorate in public health, a career in healthcare research. She was not someone who stumbled into success. She worked for it deliberately. She eventually landed at Purdue Pharma in Stamford, Connecticut. That was where she met Nelson Sessler, a colleague. Their friendship grew into something more, and by 1992, they were together, living in Annalisa's waterfront condominium at 123 Harbor Drive in the Shippens section of Stamford. She had recently moved to a new pharmaceutical company in New Jersey. Everything in her life was moving forward. Her family described her as someone whose positive outlook on life made her genuinely well-liked by everyone around her. She had a close bond with her siblings, Renato Jr. and Bernadette. Her parents, both doctors, had watched their daughter build a life that reflected everything they had given her. On November 8, 2002, she was found dead in the foyer of her Stamford condo, covered in blood, 9 stab wounds in her face, neck, and chest, her head bludgeoned multiple times. A clump of hair gripped in her hand showed she had fought back hard against whoever did this to her. She was 32 years old. Her parents waited 10 years for justice. Annalisa's murder left investigators with more questions than answers. There were no signs of forced entry, no clear suspect, just a violent, deeply personal attack that suggested one thing: whoever killed her knew her and as detectives started looking into the people closest to Annalisa, one name would eventually stand out: Sheila Davalloo. Sheila Davalloo was born on May 11, 1969, in Iran. She and her family immigrated to the United States in the late 1970s to escape the violence of the Iranian Revolution, settling in Westchester County, New York. She was sharp academically from early on. She attended SUNY Stony Brook, where she earned a biochemistry degree before going on to graduate school at New York Medical College in Valhalla, New York. At graduate school, she met Paul Christos and began an affair with him while still married to her first husband, Fareed Mousavi. When Mousavi found out, he filed for divorce. Sheila and Paul married in 2000 and moved to a condominium in Pleasantville, New York, just north of the city. Paul worked at Cornell University's Manhattan campus. Sheila landed a research scientist position at Purdue Pharma in Stamford, Connecticut. From the outside, everything about Sheila looked like success: an immigrant story, a graduate degree, a research career at a major pharmaceutical company, a husband in academia, a nice home in the suburbs. What nobody around her knew was that by the time they moved into that Pleasantville condo, the marriage had already gone quiet. Sheila described it herself in a prison interview. She and Paul were living more like roommates than spouses. The passion that had started as an affair had cooled into routine. And somewhere in that routine, Sheila found something at work that felt like everything the marriage no longer did. His name was Nelson Sessler. Nelson Sessler was a colleague at Purdue Pharma. He and Sheila began an affair in 2001. Sheila told him she was divorced. She was not. She was still married to Paul, and they were still living together in Pleasantville. To manage both relationships simultaneously, she had developed a system. Whenever Nelson was going to come to the condo, she told Paul that her mentally ill brother was visiting and would become agitated if he knew she was married. Paul would pack up his clothes, toiletries, and personal photographs and spend the night elsewhere. He did this without question, doing what he believed was helping his wife manage a difficult family situation. Nelson, meanwhile, believed he was in a relationship with a single woman. Then, in the winter of 2001, Nelson ended the affair. He had moved on, and eventually he met Annalisa Raimundo. By the summer of 2002, Nelson and Annalisa were serious. They were living together at her Harbor Drive condo. They were engaged, and whatever Sheila had told herself about Nelson choosing her in the end, that story was over. She was not willing to accept that. Paul testified later that during this entire period, Sheila came to him every single day to talk about what she called a love triangle between her friends, who she gave fake names. She called Nelson Jack. She called Annalisa Annalisa. She did not even bother to change her name. And she called herself Melissa. She would sit with her husband, the man she was deceiving, every single day and ask him what Jack was thinking, why he was doing this, and what Melissa should do. Paul even gave her night vision binoculars at some point. He thought he was helping a friend through a difficult situation. He did not know he was helping his wife surveil the woman she was about to kill. At one point, Sheila bought a lockpick set because, as she told Paul, Melissa wanted to break into Annalisa's apartment to look for photographs. She practiced on the front door of their own condo. She was planning this in front of her husband without him realizing it for a single second.
On the morning of November 8, 2002, Sheila Davalloo was not at her desk at Purdue Pharma. Security records later confirmed she was absent from the building between 10:53 in the morning and 1:53 in the afternoon. She claimed later that she had taken a long lunch break in New York. What she actually did during those 3 hours is in the record. She went to Annalisa Raimundo's condominium at 123 Harbor Drive in Stamford. There was no forced entry. Annalisa opened the door. She knew Sheila from work. She let her in. What happened next lasted long enough to leave blood splattered across the foyer, glass fragments and debris across the floor, and a clump of Annalisa's hair in her own hand. She fought back, that much is clear from the scene. But Sheila Davalloo stabbed her 9 times, in the face, in the neck, in the chest, with one wound deep enough to pierce the back of her lung. She also struck her over the head multiple times with a blunt object. When it was over, Sheila walked to the bathroom and washed her hands. She left a drop of blood on the bathroom's sink. Then she went to a payphone near a restaurant, called 911, gave a false address first, corrected it, claimed she had seen a man attacking her neighbor, and hung up. She was back at work by 1:53 that afternoon. When Nelson returned home from work and found police at Annalisa's door, he told officers they had broken up 2 days earlier. He appeared calm, too calm for investigators. He was brought in for questioning, but security records confirmed he was at his office in Manhattan when the murder happened. He was cleared. Every other lead dried up quickly, and the case went cold. Annalisa's parents went home to Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, without answers. They waited, and they kept waiting.
4 months after Annalisa's murder, Sheila made her next move. With Annalisa gone, she had resumed her relationship with Nelson in January 2003. But Paul was still in the picture, still the husband, still living in the condo, still in the way. The plan now was to remove him the same way she had removed Annalisa, permanently. On the afternoon of March 23, 2003, she suggested the guessing game. Paul agreed. He had no reason not to. She went first, lying on the floor, handcuffed to a chair, blindfolded, correctly identifying items while Paul pressed them against her skin. Then they switched. Paul testified about what happened next. "I heard her go down to the kitchen, and when she came up, she said, 'There is one last item, one last thing to guess.' I felt her sit on me, then I felt a thrust, like a heavy weight was on my chest, and then another thrust." She had stabbed him twice with a paring knife from the kitchen. She removed his blindfold. When he saw his shirt soaked in blood and begged her to call 911, she picked up her phone. But she did not dial 911. She called Nelson Sessler. She invited him over for dinner at around 8:30 or 9 that evening. Paul was bleeding out on the floor of their condo while she made social plans. When Paul kept insisting on getting help, she suggested trying a walk-in clinic. She went in, came back 5 minutes later, and told him it was closed. Eventually, she agreed to drive him to Westchester Medical Center, but she did not go to the emergency entrance. She drove to a remote parking lot on the hospital campus, stopped the car, got out, opened the rear door, and drove the knife into his chest a 3rd time while he lay in the back seat. Bystanders saw it happen. Paul grabbed the knife and threw it into a pile of bricks. Sheila fled. The bystanders called 911. Sheila came back and tried to force Paul into the car again. They stopped her. She fled a 2nd time. Emergency personnel arrived, and Paul told them immediately that his wife had tried to kill him. He underwent open-heart surgery and survived. Sheila was arrested the following morning. When detectives sat across from Sheila after Paul's stabbing, she had a story ready. Paul had come home with mysterious wounds. She had tried to call 911. She had no idea what happened.
Then the story shifted. It was an accident during the game. The knife slipped. She denied everything in the order she was confronted with it, adjusting each time the evidence closed off her previous version. But then investigators in Connecticut heard about the stabbing in Westchester. A woman, 2 victims she was connected to, the same method: get close, get trusted, then strike. When we heard the 911 tape from the Annalisa Raimundo scene, I said to them, "That's Sheila Davalloo's voice." Forensic voice identification experts compared the anonymous 911 call Sheila had made from the payphone near Annalisa's apartment on November 8, 2002, with the call she made after stabbing Paul. Same cadence, same voice. The woman who had called in Annalisa's murder as a witness had done so in the same voice she used when she called for help for the husband she had just stabbed. The DNA evidence confirmed it from the other side. The drop of blood at the bathroom sink at Annalisa's condo came back as a match to Sheila Davalloo. She had washed her hands. She had not washed them well enough. In Connecticut, Sheila was charged with murder. At trial in 2012, she chose to represent herself. She challenged the forensic evidence, called the DNA cross-contaminated, pointed to the lack of a murder weapon. The jury deliberated for a day and a half. On February 10, 2012, they found her guilty of murder in the first degree. When the foreman read the verdict, Sheila bowed her head and made the sign of the cross. Annalisa's parents, Dr. Renato and Susan Raimundo, were in that courtroom. They had waited 10 years. We got what we were asking for through all the years of suffering.
On April 27, 2012, Sheila Davalloo was sentenced to 50 years in prison for the murder of Annalisa Raimundo, to be served after she completes her 25-year New York sentence for the attempted murder of Paul Christos. 75 years total. Her maximum release date is October 3, 2079. She would be 110 years old. She is currently incarcerated at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for Women in Westchester County, New York. Her 2014 appeal to the Connecticut Appellate Court, arguing improper admission of marital communications and uncharged misconduct evidence, was denied. The 50-year sentence stands. In her 2014 prison interview with Oxygen's Snapped Behind Bars, Sheila Davalloo maintained that stabbing Paul was not intentional, that she suffers from PTSD related to growing up during the Iranian Revolution, that she doesn't even really remember doing it. She has never publicly accepted responsibility for Annalisa's death. There is also a third thread that investigators have never been able to fully close. Sheila Davalloo remains linked, though uncharged, to the unsolved 2001 murder of a woman named Nancy Smith. No charges have been filed. The case remains open. Annalisa Raimundo was 32 years old. She graduated from Harvard. She had a career, a relationship, a future she was building with Nelson Sessler. She opened her door that November morning for someone she recognized from work and never saw what was coming. Her parents spent 10 years asking for justice. They got it on February 10, 2012, in a Stamford, Connecticut courtroom, while a woman who chose to represent herself at her own murder trial bowed her head and made the sign of the cross. That is who Sheila Davalloo is. Someone who, even at the moment of her own conviction, was still performing. Fatal rejection. We will see you in the next one.